Hello everybody, my name is Chaos Man, and welcome to the Halo Chronicle. This video will be the first video in a 10-part series that will chronicle the rise and fall of the Forerunners within the Halo mythos. The story of the fall of the Forerunners is one of my all-time favorite stories when it comes to the expanded Halo universe. It is a story that is almost non-existent in the games, which is very disappointing as it is a very good story. 343 tried to incorporate aspects of the story into Halo 4 and even a little bit into Halo 5, but it never felt like they did the story true justice. Today, I hope to start the process of remedying that injustice. If you guys are curious about where I got my information from, please check out the Forerunner saga. It is a trilogy of books written by Greg Bear and is a phenomenal read. I don't know if my telling will do the books justice, but I'm going to do the best I can to bring you the most comprehensive accounting of the fall of the Forerunner Ecumene. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Before we can talk about the Forerunners, we must first talk about their creators, the Precursors. The Precursors arrived in the Milky Way about 15 million years ago. They would change the galaxy in many ways during their time here. Using their technology, creations, and their philosophy, they would literally bend this galaxy to their will. They would also sow the seeds that nearly brought its destruction. The Precursors were the most technologically advanced species to ever live in the Milky Way. On the technological achievement scale, they were Tier 0, which is the highest tier. To put that in perspective, no other life forms in the Milky Way have ever reached this tier. Humanity has only reached Tier 2 on this scale during their time in the galaxy. With this advanced technology, the Precursors were literally able to transport their consciousness across time and space at will. The Precursors could also harness neurophysical energy from slip space and use it to build superstructures. One of the most infamous structures that was made using neurophysical energy was called star roads. Star roads were massive cable-like structures that interweaved with one another. They resembled a nest of snakes or tentacles. These star roads could bend and shape different structures at will. They were so large that some sections of star roads could be in slip space while other sections would appear in normal space. The Precursors used these structures to literally move entire planets. They could also crush planets and suns with these large structures. One of the most important constructs the Precursors made using neurophysical energy was called the Domain. The Domain was a trans-dimensional information repository that the Precursors used to document, transmit, and interpret all information. The Domain could also store the personal memories and essences of individuals who connected to it. It acted as a living archive for the Precursors and later the Forerunners. The Forerunners would see it as their mind and soul. The Domain often behaved similarly to a living being, and as such, it had its own consciousness. The Domain could judge information entered within, the beings accessing it, and even the events happening around it. The Domain could be a bit of an enigma. It could show favoritism towards individuals accessing it and make information more readily available. It can also block individuals it deemed unworthy from accessing it or purposely distort information that individual was accessing. The Domain was also vulnerable. Forerunners used particle reconciliation to travel and navigate slip space, which could interfere with an individual's ability to access the Domain. The Precursors' immutable desire to create did not just extend to their technology, it extended to life itself. The Precursors were responsible for creating all life in the galaxy, including both the Forerunners and humanity. To better understand the life they created, the Precursors would devolve themselves into primitive life forms and place themselves in the same circumstances as their creations. They would then advance through life and see the world through their creation's eyes. Through these experiments, the Precursors would discover what they would call the sweetness of life. For the Precursors, the sweetness of life was the trials and tribulations of life. They believed that life included both joy and suffering. They believed that their creations were better for the suffering that they endured throughout their lives. They believed interfering with these trials would hold the species back and prevent them from reaching their full potential. To prevent themselves from interfering with the growth of their creations and to protect the sweetness of life, The Precursors would create a set of principles. They would call these principles the Mantle of Responsibility. Using these principles as a guidepost, the Precursors began to test different species to see if they were strong enough to inherit this mantle and become the new caretakers of the universe. One species the Precursors tested were the Forerunners. The Forerunners were seen as a prideful, arrogant species. They believed that they were the stewards of the Precursors, and as such they were their successors. The Forerunners believed that they were entitled to the Mantle of Responsibility. They were tested through long study. Following these tests, the Forerunners were found unworthy of inheriting the Mantle of Responsibility. The Precursors declared that this decision was final and that humanity would be the next species tested. What happened after this test is a matter of perspective. From the perspective of the Precursors, the Forerunners became enraged after they were passed over. Rather than accepting the decision passed down by the Precursors, they decided if the mantle would not be given to them, they would take it by force. The Forerunners launched an unprovoked attack against the Precursors. They caught the Precursors off guard, and this led to a very successful campaign against them. From the perspective of the Forerunners, they believed since they were found unworthy that the Precursors would destroy them, as they believed had been done to previous species that failed this test. However, there is very little evidence to support this claim. Desperate for survival, the Forerunners launched a surprise attack against the Precursors, and they found success early in this campaign. No matter what perspective you believe, the result was the same. The Forerunners viciously and efficiently attacked their creators. Whether it was by shock or general unpreparedness, the Precursors were too slow to respond to this great challenge. There is also a theory that the Precursors invoked the mantle. The theory is that the Precursors believed if they responded to the Forerunners' challenge, they would interfere with the sweetness of life, and as such, they refused to fight. Whatever the reason, the Precursors were devastated and driven out of the Milky Way entirely. What remained of these ancient beings fled to Path Chthona, which is a small satellite galaxy that orbits the Milky Way. This bought the Precursors some time to make plans to ensure their survival, as the Forerunners did not yet have the technology needed to reach Path Chthona. The Precursors knew their time was growing desperately short, and as such they began making plans to ensure their survival. One of these plans was to break themselves down into a regenerative powder that would allow them to reform themselves at a later time after Forerunner aggression had subsided. This plan would ultimately fail, as the powder would never reconstitute the Precursors into their original forms. The second plan was to seal themselves into stasis capsules of neurophysical design. The Forerunners never advanced their technology to the level that would allow them to access neurophysical architecture, and as such, the Precursors that were sealed in these stasis capsules would largely be protected from any Forerunner attack. This plan was successful, as one Precursor survived millions of years by using one of these stasis pods. Eventually, Judgment Day came for the Precursors. The Forerunners developed the technology they needed to send the largest attack fleet in their history to Path Chthona. This attack was efficient and absolute. When the Forerunners were done, there were no living Precursors in Path Chthona. The Forerunners who carried out this final act of genocide were so ashamed by what they had done that many of them refused to return home. Some even took their own lives. Those who remained chose to live in a self-imposed exile. They gave up all forms of technology and chose to live as primitives on a desolate planet. To help these exiled Forerunners remember their shame, they built a sort of biological domain. This biological domain would store the history of these exiled Forerunners, but it also behaved very differently than the original domain in one major aspect. Unlike the domain in the Milky Way, this biological domain would have one fundamental truth that would always be at the forefront and would never decay over time. The truth was that the Forerunners betrayed and killed their creators. The Forerunners killed the Precursors. To make sure these exiled Forerunners always remembered this truth, this biological domain was imprinted on a canyon wall. Meanwhile, back in the Milky Way, the Forerunners would seize the Mantle of Responsibility and take control of the domain. They would pervert or corrupt the Mantle to help justify their actions. Under Forerunner rule, the Mantle would be seen as the responsibility to protect all life in the galaxy, even through force. The Forerunners would not protect the sweetness of life as the Precursors originally intended. They had no issues interfering with the development of different life forms in the galaxy. They would also begin to interface with the domain and store their histories, just as the Precursors did. However, it seemed that the domain did not appreciate what the Forerunners did to its masters. It hid and locked away all information regarding the Forerunner-Precursor War. Over time, all memories of this bloody genocide would begin to fade. Newer generations of Forerunners would believe that the Precursors peacefully passed the mantle to the Forerunners before leaving the Milky Way. No matter what the Forerunners did to try to erase history, they could not erase everything. The massive Precursor structures, created with neurophysical energy, would remain as the Forerunners had no means to destroy them. The Forerunners never found a way to interface with neurophysical architecture. The newer generations would see these structures as relics or artifacts that the Precursors left behind for the Forerunners to study to unlock their potential. With no memory of this terrible war and no rival to stop them, the Forerunners would rule as the galaxy's caretakers for the next 10 million years. This is going to conclude the first part in this series. I hope you guys enjoyed my content, and if so, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I plan on writing and delivering the second part of the story within the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.